It was a cold evening, the leafless trees casting twisted shadows upon the damp earth. The sound of footsteps crunching softly against the ground could be heard as a small figure made their way along the winding pathway. Melody strolled cautiously through the darkened forest that stretched out in front of her, the cool breeze sending a chill up her spine. She adjusted the light blue scarf she wore around her neck, tugging it slightly in hopes to keep the cold air from hitting it. Melody glanced upwards, past the trees, and gazed at the full moon as she walked, admiring its bright luminescence and how the stars were scattered across the sky. Now, you are probably wondering, why is this girl wandering around in a dark forest at night by herself? Well, the answer to that is simple. Only a mere 10 minutes ago, she had gotten a single text message from one of her closest friends, Mickey, simply stating to meet her in Whisper Grove at 9 p.m. exactly, for she had something important to tell her. Melody had questioned this at first. For one, Mickey was terrified of the dark, so asking her to meet so late at night was certainly rare. The second thing that Melody was concerned about was the fact that Mickey had asked to meet her in Whisper Grove. It had been deemed a place where the spirits dwell, and if you were to be caught by one, you would never return to the world of the living. Not to mention it was creepy as hell, as Melody would have described it. But she knew that her companion must have had a good reason for their meetup, so she discarded her doubts and decided to follow her friend's instructions. Melody stopped walking for a brief moment to pull out her mobile phone, which was tucked away in the pocket of her faded blue jeans. She unlocked her phone and read through the message once again to ensure that she was going the right way. Melody, I want you to meet me at Whisper Grove at 9 p.m. near the huge willow tree. There's something I have to tell you. That was all that Mickey had wrote. Melody felt slightly on edge when she had first read the text. Her friend was the type of person who would use emojis all the time when they talked, even when it was something serious. But this particular message had none whatsoever. Not a single one. Melody knew that something must be bothering her if she didn't add a smiley face or something within that message. The other thing that was off-putting was the way Mickey had typed her name out. There was no hello or hey there, just her name and nothing else. Again, Melody thought that whatever Mickey wanted to talk about must be a big deal if she wasn't willing to put a friendly greeting at the start of her text. But in the end, she had pushed her uneasy feelings aside and had left the comfort of her home to travel to Whisper Grove. Melody's gaze glanced at the time on her phone, the screen shining brightly and giving her face an abnormal white glow. It was 8:57 p.m. She would have to hurry if she was going to be there on time. She quickened her pace, her short blue hair trailing softly behind her. Her black-rimmed glasses bounced lightly on her nose as she walked, causing her to push them back up again with her finger. She pulled the sleeves of her scratchy grey jumper over her hands in hopes to keep them warm from the icy wind that whipped around her. As Melody walked along, she could see the dark outline of the willow tree ahead of her, its long wilted leaves hanging heavily on its drooping branches. She got closer, her brisk walk slowly retreating to slow, cautious steps as the enormous figure of the willow tree loomed above her. Melody swallowed thickly, a feeling of uncertainty pulsating through her. Her ocean blue eyes glanced around the area. Surrounding the trunk of the ancient willow tree were a small assortment of wilted dead flowers, their rotting smell making its way into Melody's nostrils. She covered her nose with a hand in disgust, her nose stinging from the unpleasant odor. Apart from the tree itself, there wasn't much around, apart from the endless rows of dead, twisted trees, their shadows casting ominous shapes upon the ground. With her heart racing, Melody clutches the front of her jumper with a shivering hand, in hopes of giving her some comfort. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she sees something. She turns slowly, gazing into the darkness in front of her. There was no source of light to be found in her current area, so pulling out her phone once more, she opens the flashlight function. In an instant, her phone creates a bright fluorescent light, and using the device, she directs the beam in front of her. There was nothing. She then directed the light to her left. Still, nothing. Lastly, she moves the light to her right. Melody almost dropped her phone. There, standing about 2 meters away from her, was a girl. Her back was turned, but after a moment, Melody realized that this figure was indeed her best friend. How was she able to tell? Mickey was well known for her bright burgundy-coloured hair, which had a natural wave throughout. Even from behind, she could tell it was her. Melody sighed in relief, her uneasiness fading away. She took a step forward.
There you are! You gave me a bit of a scare. You know how fragile I can be.
She said, sarcasm clear in her voice. She expected that Mickey would turn around and laugh or retaliate with a witty comeback, but she didn't move. Melody noticed that her friend was only wearing a plain white dress, which ended just above her knees. Melody's eyes glanced down at Mickey's feet to find that she was barefoot. Melody started to worry. There were two things that Mickey absolutely hated, being cold and getting her feet dirty. But here she was, standing in a forest with nothing but a dress to keep her warm, her bare feet sinking into the muddy ground. Melody clutched her phone tighter in her hand, swallowing the huge lump that had formed in her throat. She took another step forward.
Hey, are you alright? You seem a bit...
Melody paused.
off.
Still, Mickey didn't move a muscle. She just stood there, back turned, arms at her sides. Melody was starting to get nervous, her palms becoming sticky with sweat. This wasn't like Mickey at all, but she was determined to find out why her friend had dragged her all the way out here. Melody stepped forward once more.
Mickey, you're scaring me. Please say something.
Nothing, not a single word came from Mickey's mouth. An eerie silence fell upon them, with the occasional creaking of the twisted trees that surrounded them both. Melody was getting sick of this silent treatment, but she didn't want to fight with her. So she took one last step forward, only mere centimeters from where Mickey stood. She took a deep breath and spoke.
Michaela, why did you ask me to meet you here?
Melody rarely used Mickey's full name, but she thought that this was a situation where she would have to. She hadn't moved the light from her phone away from Mickey since the one-way conversation had started, and she wasn't planning to either. Mickey still remained silent. Melody was about to give up, but she was caught off guard by the sound of her best friend's voice cutting through the silence. What are you most afraid of? Mickey's tone was emotionless and sounded slightly deeper than her usual voice. Melody was confused by the question. She was scared of a lot of things, but was this what Mickey had wanted to talk about? What was she afraid of? Melody found that incredibly stupid, even for Mickey, who was known to be quite idiotic at times. But before she could answer, Mickey turned around. Melody's phone slipped from her hand and fell to the ground with a thud. The light from her phone turned off as it hit the ground, obviously caused by a button accidentally being pressed. Her eyes widened in horror as she stared into the face of what she thought was her friend. Mickey's eyes were nothing but two black holes with small crimson pupils that glowed in the darkness. An unknown black substance dripped from her eyes, trickling down her cheeks and dripping off her chin. A twisted grin was plastered on her face, one that sent a chill up Melody's spine. Her heart was beating loudly in her chest as she breathed heavily, petrified. Mickey took a step toward her, her feet making an unpleasant squelching sound as she did so. Melody stumbled backward and fell on her backside, the cold mud already soaking through her jeans. Mickey's grin widened as she raised her left hand, holding something. A knife. It gleamed in the moonlight, and Melody could see her terrified expression in the reflection of the blade. Mickey seemed to find Melody's fear amusing, because she laughed. Not the warm-hearted laugh that Melody was used to, but a cold, heartless, maniacal laugh that shook her very core. Mickey took another step forward, and Melody scooted back, not wanting to be any closer to her than she already was. Mickey leaned forward slightly, pointing the knife at Melody, her inhuman eyes staring at her. You didn't answer my question. Her voice sounded distorted, like someone had tampered with her vocal cords. She pointed the tip of the knife towards Melody's chest, her eyelids drooping slightly. That's not very nice. Maybe I should teach you a lesson in manners. Melody's eyes widened in terror as Mickey raised the knife above her head, a psychotic grin plastered on her twisted face. Melody reacted instantly, extending her leg and kicking Mickey in the left knee. Mickey collapsed onto the ground, face first into the muddy earth, but she didn't cry out. Melody took this opportunity to scramble to her feet and run away from the monster that had taken the form of her friend. Adrenaline pulsed through her body as her feet pounded loudly against the ground. From behind her, she could hear the sound of laughter, a horrible sound that made its way into Melody's ears. She didn't want to look back, so she kept going, beads of sweat running down her forehead as she ran through the darkened forest. She had abandoned her phone, so she had no light to guide her and no way of knowing which way to go. She just wanted to get away from all of it. It had to be a bad dream, it just had to be. Melody could feel the hot, burning tears in her eyes, obscuring her vision. She was scared. She was scared of the thing that was chasing her. She was scared of dying. Suddenly, without warning, Melody tripped over a rock that was protruding from the ground, and she fell forward, her body colliding with the muddy pathway. A sharp pain ran up her leg, and she cried out in agony. Her body was sprawled out across the ground, her clothes covered with mud and gravel. She glanced down at her right leg, which was where the pain was coming from. It didn't appear to be broken, but it felt like she had sprained her ankle. Melody started hyperventilating, her breathing becoming uneven and her heart rate increasing. She tried to stand back up so she could keep running, but the pain was too much for her to bear. She wasn't going anywhere. She could hear footsteps coming towards her, getting louder and louder until Mickey's grotesque figure appeared from the darkness, her blood-red pupils glowing intensely. She walked like a zombie, her arms hanging loosely at her sides. Melody scrambled back helplessly, knowing full well that there was nowhere she could go. Mickey's face and dress were splattered with mud and dirt, the knife clutched tightly in her hand. Her grin hadn't left her face as she slowly moved towards Melody, who began to cry.
Please don't kill me,
she pleaded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mickey didn't listen. She grabbed Melody by her scarf and pushed her forcefully onto her back.
No! Please! Stop it!
Melody screamed as Mickey moved to straddle her waist, pinning her to the ground. Melody squirmed and flailed her arms around, desperately trying to escape. That was a mistake. Mickey grabbed hold of Melody's right arm and pinned it down. She rolled up the sleeve of Melody's sweater, and raising her left arm, she drove the knife into Melody's arm. She screamed in pain, the knife piercing her flesh. Blood poured from the wound, spraying across Mickey's face and dress. Mickey then moved to Melody's left arm, once again plunging the knife into it, relishing in Melody's cries and painful screams. Melody could barely see, her tears blurring her vision. Mickey laughed evilly, brushing her hair out of her face, which was also stained with blood.
Wow, look how much blood you've lost already, and I haven't even finished yet,
Mickey said, giggling like a child, touching her face and smearing some of the blood onto her open palm, grinning wildly. Melody whimpered in fear, the pain in both her arms still present.
Let's see if we can get some more out of you,
she said, raising the knife once more.
No! Please, no! Stop!
Melody was unable to finish her sentence as Mickey plunged the knife into her stomach. She could feel her insides being ripped apart and the metallic taste of blood in her mouth. She began to cough violently as blood began to build up in her throat. Mickey pulled the knife out, the crimson substance covering her dress and face, making her look even more terrifying. Melody began to choke on her own blood, loud gurgles and coughs erupting from her throat.
Stop.
She managed to splutter as blood leaked from her mouth and dripped onto the muddy earth beneath her. Mickey hesitated for a brief moment, and Melody had the tiniest glimmer of hope that Mickey might let her go. But that glimmer was soon extinguished as Mickey leaned forward and whispered in Melody's ear.
Sorry, but I'm having too much fun to let you live.
And with that, Mickey drove the blood-stained knife into Melody's stomach once again, earning another painful scream from her victim. Mickey then began to relentlessly stab Melody's body, not caring where the blade would end up. Even when Mickey pierced Melody's heart and the last bit of life was taken from her, she continued to drive her knife into the corpse, blood spraying, skin tearing. Mickey laughed maniacally as she did so, her face and dress completely drenched in Melody's blood. Eventually, Mickey stopped, breathing heavily as she looked down upon the now slaughtered body of her victim. She giggled, loving the way the blood pooled around her like a river. But then, something changed in Mickey's expression. The crazy grin that had stayed on her face through the whole thing suddenly disappeared. And she woke up. It was a whole week before the police found Melody's corpse. After receiving a call from Melody's parents that she had gone to meet a friend in Whisper Grove but didn't return home, a search party had been organised to find the girl. When they did find her, it was a horrifying sight. her body laid in a pool of dried up blood, as she appeared to have suffered from multiple stab wounds to her stomach, arms, chest, and head. But she wasn't the only corpse they found. Lying next to her was the body of a girl around the same age. She was covered in blood and had several stab wounds to her chest. After some investigating, the police concluded that this was a case of murder-suicide. Melody had gone into the forest to meet her friend, had been murdered, then her friend killed herself to ensure that no one would take her alive. The police disposed of the bodies respectfully, and both of the girls' funerals took place a week later. It had been 6 months since the death of the 2 girls who were found in Whisper Grove. People started to make up rumors that if you went to Whisper Grove, you would be killed by the girl who murdered her best friend. No one dared to enter that forest from that moment on. But if you were brave enough to go into Whisper Grove, and if you listened carefully, you would still be able to hear the dying screams of the girl that was murdered. And if you were to stay for long enough, in the darkness, you would see the spirit of the murderer, her face twisted into a crazy and heartbroken expression, and her white dress stained crimson red. She would stab herself in the heart 5 times before turning her head to you, hot burning tears streaming down her face, and with her final breath, the knife still lodged in her chest, she would whisper,